Petra Kuppinger is going to be speaking about Al-Nur Mosque in Stuttgart.
Okay, and since the title is sort of very broad, I'm going to add on sort of subtitle is An Arab Mosque and the Negotiation of German Islam, to sort of give you a little bit of a sense of where this is going in a sort of very complicated field at present in Germany, where Muslims of very different sort of backgrounds, very different levels of engagement with mainstream society in particular cities are actually in the process of developing sort of Muslim public spheres. And my particular sort of work in this mosque is sort of to see how this particular Arab mosque contributes on the one side to construction of personal identities, but also how it contributes to sort of the construction of a larger urban Muslim public sphere within the city of Stuttgart, but also how it contributes to the making of debates about Islam, Islamic debates within Germany. So that's just sort of the field of this, of the paper. I recently attended a wedding in the Al-Nur Mosque in Stuttgart. When I arrived in what otherwise served as the women's prayer room, over 100 women and children were seated at long tables arranged close to each other to accommodate this sizable crowd. A man delivered plates of food on a cart from the elevator from the downstairs kitchen and pushed it into the hall, and the women took over and distributed it into the actual wedding. I had missed the ceremony, so I didn't see the imam and the groom, which had already left for the downstairs men's quarter, where the men celebrated downstairs and the women celebrated upstairs. Now, the bride and groom, let me just introduce those briefly. Rahma was a student from Morocco, and by the way, all names, and also actually the Al-Nur name, are all pseudonyms. Rahma was a student who had only come to Germany about 5-6 years prior to her wedding to study in a very competitive engineering field where she was one among 10% of female students. And the groom was Hakan, a young guy getting ready to be a pediatrician who had lived most of his life in Germany, who was of Turkish descent. And the two of them had met on a trip organized by this mosque association to Andalusia. And within a few weeks of meeting at this trip, they announced their engagement/wedding, which was then celebrated in the Al-Nur Mosque, and that's sort of what I had just described. And they planned now, because Hakan had grown up in a different city and was actually a medical resident elsewhere, that by the end of this coming summer, that he would try to get to finish his residency in Stuttgart, and they would start their married life in Stuttgart. Now, the marriage and wedding celebration of Rahma and Hakan illustrate the complexity of emerging German Muslim cultures and the mediating role played by the Arab Al-Nur Mosque in the construction of these new life worlds. Rahma and Hakan married without dating and celebrated their German wedding in a gender-segregated environment, complying with a strict interpretation of Islamic teachings in sort of going with the local communal norms. And what's interesting about the marriage is that they married ethnic others, which is sort of not what you, in particular in Turkish communities, find, professional academic equals, and very importantly, religious partners. These characteristics and circumstances of the spouses and the marriage situate them in an emerging pious German Muslim sphere and indeed make them pioneers of a relatively new lifestyles and practices. The emerging pious Muslim German sphere distances itself both from the cultural traditions of Muslim majority countries and dominant German cultural norms and patterns. The new sphere searches for authentically Islamic ways and solutions which also very much work in sort of a liberal secular society. And places like the Arab Al-Nur Mosque play a very crucial role in the articulation of German Muslim individual religiosities and Islamic cultural and public spheres. They constitute meeting spaces for diverse Muslims and are sites for religious learning, debates, and experiments with new practices, sentiments, and relationships. Everyday practices and habits are discussed, tested, compared, learned on the mosque premises, as much as larger lifestyles or the possibilities of lifestyles are outlined. The mosque is individual members and visitors, and the groups that are part of the mosque. There's some groups that are part of the mosque. There's a few other groups that meet in the mosque. So it's a very complex field, and they sort of form a very loosely circumscribed field in which sort of numerous activities and engagements unfold, which ultimately contribute to the construction of Muslim-German life worlds. Now, what I'm going to explore in this paper is sort of what are the issues, transformation, trends, practices that are negotiated in this mosque, what are guiding influences and dynamics, and what are concrete results, and also what exactly is the position of this particular mosque in relation to other mosque communities. And Stuttgart has about 25 mosque communities. And also what sets this Arab mosque apart from some of the Turkish mosques, and also where are they sort of fusing and working together. So it's a fairly large project. Sort of what is actually or is there a special role for Arab mosques in the negotiation of urban Muslim public spheres, and what exactly is it, and if there is a difference between Arab and Turkish mosques, what would account for the differences in roles and contributions? So that's some of the larger questions that I have. Now, what I'm setting my work against is, first of all, there's a very strong popular discourse in Germany sort of against mosques. Sort of mosques are dark and dangerous sites, and they're all the same in terms of sort of the public discourse. And they're oppressive to women, they're dangerous, and people might be scheming all kinds of nasty things in mosques. So that's one thing that I'm sort of working with or against. The other thing is, overall, in sort of in academic works about Islam in Germany, there is sort of a focus on Turkish mosques, which makes sense because probably 80–90% of the mosques are indeed Turkish, but there's very little done on the influence of Arab mosques, and I would claim that regardless of their fairly small size, the Arab mosques play a very important role in debates about Islam in Germany, as I will unfold in a moment. Also, what's important to see is that not all mosques are the same. Simply, there's ethnic differences, political and theological. For example, very important for the Turkish mosque, for example, is a big split between those that are run by the Turkish Presidency for Religious Affairs in Ankara, so they're outposts, basically, of the Turkish government, and there are several that are sort of independent of Turkish politics. And then there's theological difference. So basically what I'm saying is that the mosquescape of Stuttgart, or any German mosquescape, is extremely diverse and also sort of very vibrant in ways that the German public, for the most part, doesn't even see. So I'm focusing on the Al-Nur Mosque, and just let me give you a little bit of a background of where this is organizationally positioned. The Al-Nur Mosque operates under the umbrella of the Islamic community of Germany, the Islamische Gemeinde Deutschland, which works in the very large and vague orbit of the Muslim Brotherhood, which again, you know, as you'll see in a moment, gives them a lot of trouble because state security is on their back day and night. Even though it's not a clear tie, but obviously when you look at their intellectual orbit, it's the kind of things, you know, that Alexander just talked about. Yusuf al-Qaradawi is really big, and these kind of things. But at the same time, they're independent, and they're sort of very focused also on their work in Germany. Now, the Al-Nur Mosque in Stuttgart is a fairly large mosque considering the sort of smaller size of the Arab population within Germany. And the members are sort of very mixed, nationally speaking. Probably the biggest groups are Egyptians, Palestinians, Jordanians, Syrians, and Lebanese. But the sprinkling of other people, and what's very important in that mosque is a growing sprinkling of converts to Islam, Germans, but also I've encountered Italian, Russian, and Greek converts in that mosque. And then there's a small sprinkling of people who, for various reasons, a few Turkish people who don't want to associate with Turkish mosques, or people who just don't have mosques because the communities are so small, like Somalis, or people of second, third, fourth generation who are not strong enough in their own sort of the languages of their ancestors, and they join the Arab mosque because the Arab mosque, more than any other mosques in Germany, have a lot of programs in Germany because the Arabs themselves, being more dispersed, and the younger people have lost touch with their language, so there's way more going on in terms of groups and meetings and lectures that are held in German, which attracts a lot of different people. So that's sort of the setup of the mosque. The mosque itself is really interesting. It has 3 different suites in a residential and commercial building on 3 different floors. So on any Muslim holiday, the staircase is like one huge highway going up and down. Because people, and mostly the kids, have to constantly go back and forth. The moms are up on the 4th floor, and the dads are down on the first floor, and then there's sort of this liminal space in the middle, which is for public events where things also happen. So it's a really interesting spatial setup that very nicely accommodates gender segregation with the women upstairs and the men downstairs. And those who don't have kids to shuttle back, they always have cell phones. So you can always call your husband, whatever, and say, we'll leave in. So that's sort of an interesting setup just for the community to have those 3 different apartments that they sort of deal with. Now, the setup, as I already said, what characterizes Arab mosques, and I think the Stuttgart Mosque is very much similar to the other mosques of the same association, Munich, and other cities, for example. Again, mostly characterized by loss of language, comes much quicker than with the Turkish community, so there's much more German being spoken in the mosque, which allows for other people to come in. Dispersed geographies, meaning there is no Arab community in a local neighborhood. We're saying, your friends are going to have, 15 friends your children are going to have 15 friends that speak Arabic. No, they're probably 1 or 2 to a classroom. So people are more isolated than, for example, the Turkish community. And the other thing is a lot of Arab also came in as students, and by way of visa regulations and all kinds of things, and that's very anecdotal. My experience is that there's a much higher rate of intermarriage in the Arab communities than in the Turkish communities compared to numbers, so you have a lot more mixed families in the mosques. And as I said already, one thing that really characterizes the dealings of the Arab mosque is state security, because state security watches them all the time. In my understanding, watches them really badly, in a sense that if you read state security reports, the annual report that comes out, it really reads like a bad student paper. And so these people have no idea what they're doing, and it's always the same. Hassan al-Banna founded it, and Said Ramadan founded the Munich community, and therefore they're all really whatever. So it's really an interesting read to see what these people of state security do. And their biggest accusation the last few years has been every year the annual day of the open mosque, which coincides with the German national holiday. The mosque has books that are anti-state security on their book table. And there are some of the books that I've been going through that have been sitting on that book table for 4 years because nobody buys them, nobody reads them, but the state security every year writes that Rocher Garaudy and all these people are on the book table. So that's something that they deal with. So basically, it prevents the mosque from being a partner of local schools, local churches, of cooperation, which a lot of Turkish mosques have very close cooperation with neighborhoods, things, and so on. So basically, they're cut out from this kind of circuit, and therefore they're very much focused on internal affairs. Internal debate, what is sort of going on, negotiating Islam, and very early on, the Islamic Community of Germany, the umbrella organization, has sort of dealt with issues of dawah are very important to them, and that's why they do have more converts, because that seems to be much more of an issue for a lot of Turkish mosques, in particular state-run ones. It's more like keeping in touch with Turkish Islam, with Turkish debates, and not so much calling other people onto the folds of Islam. So again, that makes them different, so that there is a sizable number of converts. Also, if you look at convert accounts of conversion in Germany, most of them in the end join Arab mosques and not Turkish mosques. There's few people in Turkish mosques. Again, you have to know Turkish to be in a Turkish mosque. For the most part, it's changing slowly, but you don't have to know Arabic to be in an Arabic mosque. So what I want to look at now really briefly is just a few short examples of what are the kind of things that then unfold in this mosque that contribute to the construction of German identities, German Muslim life worlds, and so on and so forth. One of the examples is a lecture given in particular to the young people, and it was entitled Young, German, and Muslim, and that is good that way. Which was given by Bilal al-Sayyad, who is part of the al-Sayyad family, who pretty much is at the top of the German of the sort of umbrella association. His brother was the head of the National Association until this January. And the lecture very much sort of was meant to show these kids that their task is really to foster their own belief, their own faith, and the position of Muslims in Germany, and not to be sort of constantly looking back to the old countries, because you're here now, this is your place to be. And Bilal al-Sayyad was really very good in fusing, first of all, his 1 foot in Germany and his 1 foot in the Arab/Muslim world. First of all, he is of mixed parentage, and he made a big point of that. Sort of, don't say anything against Muslims, don't say anything against Germans, because I'll be really upset. And then he really nicely had sort of references to German pop culture, and actually the title of his lecture was taken from the mayor of Berlin, and the original thing was German gay, and that's good that way. So it was really interesting that he took this sort of saying from a gay mayor, and in his next sentence, as his next reference, he introduced Hassan al-Banna, and so those are his two universities that he drew from. You want to be very German, you want to be very Muslim. And at one point in his lecture, he had a PowerPoint, he had in huge letters, in capital letters, up on the wall, "We are Germany," and sort of reminded these kids that this is sort of where you are, this is where you have to work. And at one point he said, it is our jihad to live in Germany, again, to build Islam, to make people see sort of the good sides of Islam, and again, to also call people to Islam. And that sort of was these young people's task would be, ideally, if, you know, they sort of lived up to what he thought. And he was very worried they would be all too focused on their home countries. So I have to run through the other example that I had only want to briefly mention is the Al-Nur Mosque also has a German language Quran study group for women, which is mostly made up of converts and a few younger women of Arab descent who basically speak better German than they speak Arabic. And it's a really interesting group because it's really a gateway into Islam for women who have just converted, or also there's sort of a coming and going of young women who are interested, a lot of them because they're dating Arab men. Some of them do convert, some of them don't convert. But it's a good place to sort of taste Islam, learn something about it, and then make a decision about whether you want to join. And it's also a place where people can ask the most mundane question. Just a few weeks ago, the question came up, if a woman who doesn't cover her hair, can she dye her hair? Is that okay? Or the question, as somebody said, is it true that a lot of the sausages on the pizzas in the Turkish stores really is not halal, but they just say it is halal? So it's from very big things, sort of the question of paradise to the question of salami, and also to be socialized into a new network of friends. And these women are very welcoming to new women, and there's a lot of social life and sort of hanging out and doing stuff with each other and learning new ways. The other thing about the mosque that's very important is that it's a place that teaches people how to be good Muslims in almost like a Muslim utopian space. Because everybody sort of goes by the rules of the mosque of gender segregation, and very strictly, but every single one of these people, of course, lives outside in the city, in their schools, in their work, where these things are not done. So it's not about schizophrenia of having two personalities, but it's very clearly, this is part of the Ummah. This space is in Stuttgart, but it goes by the rules of the Ummah, the global Muslim space, and you ought to behave by this. And one of those scenes that really struck me was a young woman who was from a Spanish Pakistani family who had just recently sort of reverted back to Islam. And at one point, the youth group was running out of chairs, and they sent her to another room and said, get some chairs. And she came running back, and she said, there's a man in the room, I can't get chairs. And everybody agreed that she shouldn't be in the room, but everybody knew her teacher's probably a male too. But it was thought that in this space, she has to go by these rules, and it was very important for her because she hadn't grown up in a religious household to indicate that she knew these rules and she was willing to go by these rules in this kind of. So that's another really important function of that mosque, is to show people these ways, to teach them these ways, socialize them into it, and act accordingly within mosque spaces, but not necessarily outside, because everybody knows society different, outside works differently. So just to sum it up, it's very important to see that obviously not all mosques are the same. That seems fairly obvious. And the particular political situation of an Arab mosque like the Al-Nur Mosque creates a certain space, and out of the sort of restrictions that society imposed on them, but also the sense of the dawah is important, the construction of German Islam. Also, there's a lot of, out of this kind of mosque association, texts and pamphlets in German being published. So the mosque itself has developed a very clear space within Stuttgart and also associated within Germany, where they're extremely vibrant, dynamic, and a lot of debates unfold in this, regardless of state security, that you find a lot of really interesting things In the mosque, also the mosque, as we just said with this small example of the young girl and of the marriage, that the mosque also functions as a quasi-family and home space for a lot of the younger people who either don't have families in Germany because they're students, or who come from families that are not particularly religious, and they learn not just sort of bookish learning in the mosque, but also new types of relationships and behaviors, and very importantly, those who don't have a family to sort of look after marriage issues for them if they don't want to date. The mosque actually also serves increasingly as a space where if you indicate I'm ready to marry, they might find there might be a spouse for you. Especially, I think it's easier for the women to find a spouse because there's sort of there's more young males simply because there's a lot of students. So I think at this point I will leave it at that. So one last point, that sort of the Arab mosques are very much of central platforms of debates about German Islam or Muslim Germans, German Muslims, because German is much more prevalent than in Turkish mosques.